Hitmen working for Mafia bosses who are still active in 2025. They were the ghosts in the shadows, men who killed without hesitation, shaping history through blood and fear. From explosive assassinations that rocked entire nations to secret murders hidden for decades, these Mafia hitmen weren't just criminals. They were weapons of terror. Even in 2025, their names send chills through courtrooms, streets, and whispered conversations. But behind every bullet and betrayal lies a story the world still struggles to understand. Are you ready to pull back the curtain on the darkest side of organized crime? Then hit subscribe like this video and join us on Legends of Black Excellence. Giovanni Brusca. Giovanni Brusca's name still chills the air in Sicily whenever it is spoken aloud. Born on February 20th, 1957 in San Giuseppe Giotto, he was raised in a family steeped in Mafia tradition. From a young age, he was groomed to follow the Corleonesi faction, the most feared wing of Cosa Nostra, under Salvatore the Beast Riina. By 19, Brusca was formally initiated with Riina himself acting as padrino. This bond created a dark mentorship that would unleash one of the bloodiest careers in Mafia history. Brusca quickly distinguished himself as a man willing to cross lines others feared. While many mobsters killed rivals or traitors, Brusca orchestrated massacres that sent political shockwaves through Italy. His involvement has been tied to more than 100 murders, with some investigators estimating as many as 200. Yet his most infamous act came on May 23, 1992, the assassination of anti-mafia judge Giovanni Falcone. Brusca masterminded a meticulously planned highway bombing near Capaci, planting 1,000 pounds of TNT under the A29 motorway. When Falcone's convoy drove over the blast, obliterated the road, killing Falcone, his wife, and 3 police escorts. The attack was not just an assassination, it was a declaration of war against the Italian state. What makes his story even darker is that Falcone's murder was not Brusca's most cruel crime. In 1993, after Santino Di Matteo became a government informant, Riina ordered the kidnapping of his 13-year-old son Giuseppe. Brusca personally oversaw the boy's captivity for 26 months, a psychological weapon meant to terrorize potential traitors. In 1996, Giuseppe was strangled and his body dissolved in acid. Even among hardened mafiosi, this act was considered monstrous. Do you think fear or blind loyalty can ever justify such inhuman brutality? Brusca's reign of terror ended on May 20, 1996, when he was captured while ironically watching a film about Falcone's murder. Facing life in prison, he chose to cooperate with prosecutors, revealing insider details about the Mafia's operations. His testimony helped convict dozens of senior bosses, but his decision to become an informant did not erase the atrocities tied to his name. Italian citizens, particularly families of victims, expressed outrage when his life sentence was reduced to just 26 years. On May 31, 2021, Brusca walked free from prison, a release that stirred national anger. Politicians, judges, and ordinary citizens questioned how a man responsible for such heinous acts could ever rejoin society. To some, he is a symbol of how justice can be compromised when authorities prioritize intelligence gathering over moral accountability. To others, his freedom is a bitter reminder of Mafia influence still lingering in Italian politics and justice. Salvatore Riina. Salvatore Riina, known as La Belva or the Beast, remains one of the most terrifying figures in the entire history of organized crime. Born on November 16, 1930 in Corleone, Sicily, Riina grew up in crushing poverty. After his father died in a mining accident when Riina was just 13, he abandoned school and entered the violent underworld of Sicily. By the 1950s, he had already earned a reputation as a ruthless enforcer for the Corleonesi clan, a faction that would one day dominate Cosa Nostra. Unlike earlier Mafia bosses who preferred negotiation and political compromise, Riina believed in raw terror. His philosophy was simple: kill anyone who threatened the family, whether they were rivals, informants, judges, or politicians. Rising under Luciano Leggio. Riina seized full control of the Corleonesi in the late 1970s. What followed became known as the Second Mafia War, a bloody purge in which more than 1,000 people were murdered between 1978 and 1983. Victims included rival bosses like Stefano Bontade and Salvatore Inzerillo, but also civilians caught in the crossfire. Riina's grip extended beyond the underworld. He directly targeted the Italian state. Judges Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino, both spearheading the Maxi trial against hundreds of mobsters, were assassinated under his orders in 1992. The Falcone bombing used half a ton of explosives beneath a Sicilian highway, while Borsellino was blown apart by a car bomb in Palermo. These murders stunned the world and revealed the Mafia's willingness to confront the government itself. Riina was finally arrested on January 15, 1993 in Palermo after 23 years as Italy's most wanted fugitive. The arrest was a national triumph, but many Italians suspected elements of the state had protected him for years. In court, Riina showed no remorse, even smirking as prosecutors read out charges. Convicted of ordering more than 150 murders, he received multiple life sentences. From prison, Riina continued to influence Mafia affairs, communicating through visitors and lawyers. His reach only faded as new bosses rose to power. Despite poor health, he remained defiant until his death on November 17, 2017, one day after his 87th birthday. Even then, controversy erupted when parts of Italian society debated whether his family should be allowed to hold a public funeral. Salvatore Riina's legacy is written in blood. To some, he was the embodiment of unchecked violence, the man who transformed Cosa Nostra into a war machine. To others, his eventual capture and death symbolized the resilience of the Italian state. Yet in 2025, his shadow still hangs over Sicily, a reminder of how one man's cruelty can scar an entire nation for generations. Richard Kuklinski. Richard Kuklinski, feared as the Iceman, built a legacy as one of the most chilling contract killers in American criminal history. Born on April 11, 1935 in Jersey City, New Jersey, he grew up in a household marked by alcoholism and abuse. By adolescence, Kuklinski had already displayed violent tendencies, lashing out at neighbors and experimenting with cruelty to animals. These early behaviors foreshadowed the brutality that would later define his reputation. In the 1960s and 1970s, Kuklinski drifted deeper into organized crime. He ran burglary rings, pirated pornographic films, and eventually became a freelance killer. Unlike many mob enforcers, he did not belong to a single family, but sold his services wherever money was offered. His murder methods ranged from firearms to cyanide poisoning, and most notoriously freezing his victims' corpses to confuse investigators. This practice earned him the grim nickname, the Iceman. His most concrete mafia connection came through Gambino underboss Sammy the Bull Gravano. In 1980, Kuklinski admitted to murdering NYPD detective Peter Calabro using a shotgun allegedly supplied by Gravano. This tie placed him in direct contact with one of New York's most powerful crime organizations. Beyond this, Kuklinski claimed involvement in major mob hits, such as the assassination of Bonanno boss Carmine Galante in 1979 and the killing of Paul Castellano in 1985, though prosecutors and historians have widely disputed these boasts. What is undeniable are the killings that were proven. George Maliband, a business associate, was shot multiple times and stuffed into a steel drum. Louis Mazgay was murdered during a videotape scam, his body stored in a freezer for 2 years before disposal. Daniel Deppner, another victim, was found decomposing under a bridge. Kuklinski treated murder as routine, claiming it was just another day at the office. His downfall came after an 18-month undercover operation by New Jersey law enforcement. Arrested in December 1986, he was convicted in 1988 of multiple murders and sentenced to consecutive life terms. Even in prison, he fascinated the public through interviews where he described his killings with unnerving calm. Behind the bravado, he occasionally admitted to being haunted by nightmares. On March 5, 2006, Kuklinski died of cardiac arrest at the age of 70. Richard Kuklinski's legacy is one of contradiction, part truth, part self-created legend. He was both a ruthless predator and a manipulator of his own myth. His story continues to illustrate how contract killers working in the shadows of mafia bosses can become as infamous as the dons they once served. Sammy Gravano. Salvatore Sammy the Bull. Gravano was born on March 12, 1945 in Brooklyn, New York, to Sicilian immigrant parents. Small in stature but fierce in ambition, he earned his nickname the Bull as a child after fighting off older boys who tried to steal his bicycle. That toughness would one day propel him to the top ranks of the Gambino crime family, the most powerful mafia organization in the United States. Gravano's climb through the underworld was steady and ruthless. By the 1970s, he was already a trusted soldier managing construction rackets and labor union extortion. He quickly became indispensable to John Gotti, the flamboyant Gambino captain who had his eyes on leadership. In December 1985, Gravano helped orchestrate one of the most shocking mob hits in history, the assassination of boss Paul Castellano outside Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan. Driving Gotti to the scene and helping coordinate the shooters, Gravano cemented his place as Gotti's most loyal lieutenant. By 1990, Gravano was officially promoted to underboss, effectively the second in command of the Gambino empire. He oversaw operations that generated more than $2 million annually through racketeering, loan sharking, and union control. But beneath his loyalty simmered a pragmatism that would soon change mafia history forever. In 1991, FBI wiretaps captured Gotti, blaming Gravano for murders they had committed together. Feeling betrayed and fearing he would take the fall, Gravano made a shocking choice. He agreed to cooperate with the government. His testimony broke Cosa Nostra's sacred oath. Gravano confessed to involvement in 19 murders and provided detailed accounts of Gambino operations. His cooperation led to John Gotti's conviction in 1992 on 5 murders and numerous racketeering charges, earning Gotti a life sentence without parole. Gravano's words also sent 39 other mobsters to prison, effectively crippling the Gambino family's leadership. In return for his loyalty to the state, Gravano received an astonishingly light sentence, just 5 years in prison, of which he served less than 1 due to time already spent in custody. After leaving the Witness Protection Program in 1995, he attempted a quiet life in Arizona, even appearing on television years later to recount his story. But the lure of crime proved too strong. In 2000, he was arrested again for running a multi-million-dollar ecstasy ring that involved his own children. Convicted in 2001, he was sentenced to 20 years, but was released early in 2017. Now in his late 70s, Gravano continues to speak publicly, sharing his version of mafia history on podcasts and interviews. Some see him as a traitor who destroyed the Gambino family, while others view him as a pragmatic survivor who chose life over loyalty. In either case, his story remains one of the most extraordinary transformations in the annals of organized crime, from feared underboss to government witness, whose testimony reshaped the American mafia forever. John Gotti. John Joseph Gotti Jr., born October 27, 1940 in the Bronx. New York rose from street-level thug to become one of the most notorious mafia bosses in American history. Known worldwide as the Dapper Don for his sharp suits and charismatic public persona, he cultivated a celebrity-like image while leading one of the most dangerous criminal organizations of the 20th century, the Gambino crime family. Growing up in poverty, Gotti dropped out of school at 16 and quickly immersed himself in street gangs. By the 1970s, he had joined the Gambino family, working under Capo Carmine Fatico and making a name through hijackings at JFK Airport. His reputation for boldness and violence earned him rapid promotion. In 1973, he carried out his first high-profile hit, the murder of mobster James McBratney, avenging the kidnapping of Carlo Gambino's nephew. The turning point in Gotti's career came in December 1985, When Gambino boss Paul Castellano was assassinated outside Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan, Gotti, with the help of loyal allies like Sammy the Bull Gravano, orchestrated the hit and seized power. By early 1986, he was officially boss of the Gambino family, overseeing an empire that earned an estimated $500 million annually through extortion, drug trafficking, loan sharking, and construction rackets. Gotti's reign was marked by both fear and admiration. He lived, lavishly walked the streets of Little Italy as a neighborhood hero, and brazenly courted the media. His ability to beat multiple trials during the late 1980s earned him another nickname, the Teflon Don. Prosecutors brought charges of racketeering and assault, but juries repeatedly acquitted him, often due to witness intimidation and jury tampering. The FBI estimated that during his peak, Gotti was responsible for sanctioning over 30 murders. The fall of the Teflon Don came through technology and betrayal. The FBI planted hidden microphones in Gotti's Ravenite social club in Little Italy, capturing him bragging about murders and implicating his underboss Gravano. When Gravano flipped in 1991, his testimony sealed Gotti's fate. On April 2, 1992, Gotti was convicted on 13 counts, including 5 murders, racketeering, and obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Gotti spent the rest of his life in the U.S. penitentiary at Marion, Illinois, later transferred to a federal medical facility as he battled throat cancer. On June 10, 2002, John Gotti died at the age of 61. Despite his crimes, he remains a cultural figure portrayed in films, documentaries, and even remembered by some as a folk hero who stood up to the establishment. John Gotti's story is a paradox. A mob boss who embraced the spotlight instead of the shadows. A man whose hunger for power and recognition both built and destroyed him. His legacy continues to spark debate. Was he the ultimate symbol of mafia power, or the cautionary tale of ego overtaking survival? Roy DeMeo. Roy DeMeo's name is synonymous with one of the bloodiest chapters in American organized crime. Born on September 7, 1940 in Bath Beach, Brooklyn, he came from a working-class Italian-American family. Intelligent and ambitious, DeMeo initially seemed destined for a legitimate career. He studied to become a mortician and later ran small businesses. But his darker instincts pulled him into the orbit of the Gambino crime family, where his appetite for money and violence soon eclipsed everything else. By the early 1970s, DeMeo had formed the infamous DeMeo Crew, a tightly organized group of killers operating out of the Gemini Lounge in Brooklyn. They perfected a grisly technique that became known as the Gemini Method. Victims were lured into the lounge, shot in the head, stabbed in the heart to stop bleeding, and dismembered in the back room. The remains were then bagged and disposed of, often making bodies vanish without a trace. Law enforcement later linked the crew to as many as 200 murders, though only a fraction were ever proven in court. DeMeo's talents extended beyond murder. He ran massive car theft operations, smuggling hundreds of stolen vehicles overseas. His crew dealt in pornography, loan sharking, and narcotics, generating millions annually for the Gambino family. Despite his reputation as a sadistic killer, DeMeo was also a businessman who understood how to balance brutality with profit. His efficiency forced boss Paul Castellano, who initially viewed him as uncontrollable, to finally induct him as a made man in 1977. But the very traits that made DeMeo valuable also made him dangerous. His crew's activities attracted unwanted FBI attention, and Castellano began to fear that DeMeo might one day flip under pressure. Rumors swirled that DeMeo had even started keeping detailed records of his crimes. By the early 1980s, paranoia within the Gambino hierarchy was running high. On January 10, 1983, DeMeo's reign came to a bloody end. He was found stuffed into the trunk of his own Cadillac, riddled with bullets. Ironically, it was members of his own crew, allegedly acting on Castellano's orders, who pulled the trigger. His murder underscored the ruthless pragmatism of the Mafia. Even the most effective killer could be discarded if he posed a risk. After his death, the Gemini Method and the DeMeo Crew became symbols of the Mafia's darkest capabilities. Trials in the late 1980s sent many of his associates to prison, but the legend of Roy DeMeo endured. To this day, criminologists cite his crew as one of the most prolific serial killing outfits in American history. Roy DeMeo's story is a chilling reminder that in the Mafia, loyalty is conditional, power is temporary, and those who live by the gun almost always die by it. Paul Castellano. Paul Castellano. Born Constantino. Paul Castellano on June 26, 1915 in Brooklyn, New York, rose from butcher's apprentice to become one of the most powerful mafia bosses in American history. Known as Big Paul because of his imposing 6'2" frame, he preferred to be seen as a businessman rather than a street thug. But behind his polished image was a leader who controlled one of the wealthiest crime families in the United States, the Gambino family. Castellano was the cousin of Carlo Gambino, and this blood tie helped him climb the ranks of Cosa Nostra. When Gambino died in 1976, Castellano inherited the top seat bypassing senior capos who expected the role. His leadership emphasized white-collar crime extortion in the construction industry, labor racketeering and bid-rigging schemes that netted the family an estimated $500 million annually by the early 1980s. He distanced himself from street-level violence, preferring quiet profits to bloody wars, though murders still occurred under his watch. Despite his vision, Castellano's rule created resentment. Many Gambino members disliked his aristocratic style. He lived in a Staten Island mansion modeled after the White House, wore tailored suits, and demanded a cut from soldiers' personal businesses. His ban on drug dealing also created friction, as younger associates saw narcotics as the most profitable trade. Capos like John Gotti felt sidelined, and whispers of discontent grew louder. In 1983, the FBI charged Castellano with RICO violations, tax evasion, and ordering murders. Wiretaps even recorded him boasting about his control over unions and contracts. His arrest weakened his grip, and while awaiting trial, rivals plotted his removal. By December 1985, John Gotti, then an ambitious capo, decided Castellano was a liability who had to be eliminated. On December 16, 1985, Castellano was gunned down in broad daylight outside Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan. 4 assassins dressed in trench coats shot him 6 times as he stepped out of his car. Beside him, his new underboss Thomas Bellotti was also executed. The hit stunned New York. It was one of the boldest mafia killings ever carried out during the evening rush in Midtown Manhattan. The message was clear: Gotti was seizing control. Castellano's death marked the end of an era for the Gambino family. Under his rule, the family had become financially powerful, but internally fractured. His assassination paved the way for Gotti's flamboyant leadership, shifting the Mafia's image from discreet businessmen back to street-style notoriety. Paul Castellano remains a complex figure, a don who wanted to modernize organized crime through business-like operations, yet whose arrogance and detachment from his soldiers cost him everything. His life and death reveal the delicate balance between power, respect, and survival in the Mafia world. Abe Relis. Abe Relis, born May 10, 1906, in Brooklyn's Brownsville neighborhood, was one of the most feared killers in American organized crime. The son of Jewish immigrants from Galicia, he grew up in poverty and turned to the streets early. By the 1930s, Brownsville was already a breeding ground for gangs, and Relis quickly carved out a reputation for brutality. His preferred weapon was an ice pick, which he used to drive through the ear and into the brain of his victims. This gruesome signature earned him the nickname, the Ice Pick Assassin. Relis became a founding member of Murder, Inc., the enforcement arm of the National Crime Syndicate. Under the leadership of labor racketeer Louis Lepke Buchalter and the feared Albert Anastasia Murder, Inc., carried out contract killings nationwide. Hitmen like Relis were paid weekly retainers about $35 a week, plus bonuses for each successful hit. Historians estimate Relis participated in at least 11 confirmed murders, though his involvement may have stretched to 30 or more. What made Relis especially terrifying was his mix of sadism and creativity. He once murdered a parking attendant for being too slow and assaulted a car wash worker over a smudge. Yet when assigned organized hits, he was methodical, carrying out orders without hesitation. Among his most infamous killings were the Shapiro brothers' rival gangsters eliminated in a series of brutal attacks. Irving Shapiro was dragged from his home and shot. Meyer Shapiro was executed on the street, and William Shapiro was buried alive. These murders cemented Murder Inc.'s reputation as a ruthless killing machine. By 1940, Relis's world unraveled. Arrested for murder and facing the electric chair, he made a stunning choice. He turned state's witness. His testimony shattered the secretive walls of Murder Inc., providing details on more than 70 unsolved killings. Thanks to Relis, Louis Buchalter was convicted and executed in 1944, along with several other high-profile mobsters. His betrayal transformed him from feared hitman to the Mafia's most dangerous liability. On November 12, 1941, while under police protection at the Half Moon Hotel in Coney Island, Relis was found dead on a roof extension 6 stories below his guarded room. The official story suggested an escape attempt, but few believed it. Many suspected that mob influence had reached the police detail, or that a payoff ensured his silence. Theories pointed to Albert Anastasia, who allegedly placed a $100,000 bounty on Relis's head. Relis's death became a legend in itself, nicknamed the canary who could sing but couldn't fly. His life and violent end illustrate the paradox of organized crime. The same men who built their power on loyalty could be undone the moment that loyalty cracked. Abe Relis remains a chilling reminder of how far the Mafia went to enforce control, and how even the most feared killer could fall victim to the same cycle of betrayal he once carried out himself. Louis Buchalter. Louis Lepke Buchalter was not just another gangster. He was the only major American mob boss ever executed in the electric chair. Born on February 6, 1897 in New York City to Russian Jewish immigrant parents, Buchalter grew up in Manhattan's Lower East Side, an area teeming with gangs. Orphaned as a teenager after his father's death and his mother's illness, he abandoned school and quickly embraced a life of crime. By the 1920s, Lepke had become a powerful labor racketeer. Unlike traditional mobsters who thrived on street violence, Buchalter saw opportunity in unions and industries. He infiltrated garment trucking and bakery unions, extorting business owners and workers alike. His control over these industries allowed him to skim millions, and soon he was one of the wealthiest racketeers in America. Estimates suggest his operations generated over $40 million annually during his peak, a staggering figure for the era. But Buchalter's true infamy came with Murder Inc., the enforcement arm of the national crime syndicate. Alongside Albert Anastasia, he directed a stable of killers, including Abe Relis, Harry Pittsburgh, Phil Strauss, and others who carried out contract murders across the country. Victims were dispatched with ice picks, strangulation cords, or guns, depending on the message that needed to be sent. Murder Inc. is believed to have been responsible for hundreds of killings from the 1930s to the early 1940s, with Buchalter giving many of the orders. Do you think Lepke's genius was in building criminal empires through unions, or in creating a killing machine that terrified even his own allies? By the late 1930s, Lepke faced intense pressure from law enforcement. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's administration made organized crime a priority, and U.S. Attorney Thomas Dewey pursued Lepke relentlessly. In 1939, Buchalter became the first major mobster to be placed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. After months in hiding, he surrendered to federal agents in 1939, an extraordinary moment, as mob bosses almost never turned themselves in. Initially sentenced to 14 years for narcotics trafficking, Lepke's downfall accelerated when Abe Relis, once one of Murder Inc.'s most loyal killers, turned informant. Relis's testimony tied Buchalter directly to multiple homicides, including the 1936 killing of candy store owner Joseph Rosen, who had threatened to expose Buchalter's rackets. In 1941, Lepke was convicted of murder, marking the first time a top crime boss was sentenced to death in the United States. On March 4, 1944, at Sing Sing Prison in Ossining, New York, Louis Buchalter was executed in the electric chair. He was the only major organized crime leader in American history to meet such a fate, and his death signaled a rare victory for law enforcement over the underworld. Lepke's story is a paradox. He was both a sophisticated businessman and a ruthless architect of murder. His empire collapsed, not from rival gangs, but from his own hitmen breaking the code of silence. His life remains a stark reminder that in the Mafia, even the highest bosses cannot escape justice forever. Albert Anastasia. Albert Anastasia, born Umberto Anastasio on September 26, 1902, in Tropea, Calabria, Italy, rose from humble immigrant beginnings to become one of the most feared mafia bosses in American history. Arriving illegally in the United States around 1917, he quickly became entangled in waterfront labor disputes. Brutal, ambitious, and cunning Anastasia aligned himself with Italian-American gangs in Brooklyn, and by the 1920s, he had already earned a reputation for violence on the Brooklyn docks. His big break came during the Castellamarese War of the early 1930s, a bloody power struggle that reshaped the American Mafia. Anastasia threw his loyalty behind Lucky Luciano, and when Luciano won, Anastasia was rewarded with a key role in the newly reorganized commission that governed organized crime. He later became underboss of the Mangano family, the group that would eventually be known as the Gambino family. What made Anastasia notorious was his leadership role in Murder Inc., the enforcement arm of the National Crime Syndicate. Alongside Louis Lepke Buchalter, he oversaw a team of professional killers who carried out hundreds of contract murders. Their victims were disposed of in alleyways, rivers, and fields with ice picks, strangulation cords, and bullets. Historians estimate Murder Inc. may have been responsible for between 400 and 1,000 killings during its existence, making it one of the deadliest organized crime groups in U.S. history. Anastasia's brutality was matched by his volatility. He was known for unpredictable rages. He once allegedly ordered a man killed simply because he took too long to park his car. Yet he was also a shrewd businessman, expanding the Mangano family's control over Union's construction and garment industries. In 1951, after the disappearance and presumed murder of boss Vincent Mangano, Anastasia assumed control of the family. His reign as boss marked the peak of his power, but it also attracted enemies. By the mid-1950s, Anastasia had become a liability to other mafia leaders. His violent reputation and disregard for the commission's rules threatened the delicate balance of power. Rival bosses, including Vito Genovese and Carlo Gambino, plotted his removal. On October 25, 1957, Anastasia met his end in one of the most infamous mob hits of all time. While sitting in the barber's chair at the Park Sheraton Hotel in Manhattan, masked gunmen burst in and riddled him with bullets. The dramatic assassination shocked the public and signaled a shift in underworld power. Albert Anastasia's legacy is a study in extremes: ruthless executioner, ambitious power player, and a boss whose unpredictability ultimately sealed his fate. His violent death paved the way for Carlo Gambino to assume leadership, reshaping the future of the American Mafia. More than 6 decades later, Anastasia's story remains one of the most chilling reminders of how quickly power and fear can turn against their master. Jack McGurn. Jack McGurn, born Vincenzo Antonio Gibaldi on July 2, 1902 in Licata, Sicily, became one of Al Capone's most trusted enforcers during the violent Prohibition era. His family immigrated to Brooklyn in 1906 and later settled in Chicago, where young Vincenzo pursued boxing under the name Battling Jack McGurn. But tragedy redirected his life in 1923. His stepfather, Angelo DeMora, was murdered by the Jenna brothers, who dominated Chicago's bootlegging scene. McGurn sought revenge, and that thirst for retribution pushed him into the arms of Capone's Chicago outfit. By the mid-1920s, McGurn had established himself as both a skilled bodyguard and a ruthless hitman. He excelled with the Thompson submachine gun, earning the nickname Machine Gun Jack. Under Capone, he was involved in violent campaigns against rival gangs, including the North Side Gang, led by Jaime Weiss and Bugs Moran. Weiss was assassinated in 1926, an operation in which McGurn played a central role. He also fended off multiple assassination attempts against Capone, proving his loyalty again and again. Yet McGurn's place in history rests primarily on one event, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre of February 14, 1929. That morning, 7 members and associates of the North Side Gang were lined up against a garage wall on North Clark Street and shot with machine guns and shotguns by assailants dressed as police officers. While Capone was in Florida with an alibi, most historians believe McGurn orchestrated the details, recruiting gunmen like Fred Killer Burke. The massacre eliminated key rivals, but it also horrified the nation and intensified federal pressure on Capone. In the years after the massacre, McGurn's fortunes declined. When Capone was imprisoned for tax evasion in 1931, the outfit's structure shifted, and McGurn's reputation for arrogance and heavy drinking made him a liability. He attempted to reinvent himself as a professional golfer, even competing in tournaments under his birth name, but his notoriety followed him. Arrests for minor crimes combined with constant surveillance eroded his influence. On February 15, 1936, just one day after the 7th anniversary of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, McGurn's life ended violently. He was gunned down in a Chicago bowling alley by 3 unidentified men, shot 3 times in the back of the head. In his pocket was a Valentine's Day card with the chilling words, "You've lost your heart." The symbolism left no doubt that his killers intended to mark his death as poetic justice. Jack McGurn's story encapsulates the brutal rise and fall of a Prohibition-era hitman. He was a loyal soldier, a key architect of Capone's dominance, and a symbol of the violence that defined Chicago in the 1920s. But his arrogance and visibility made him expendable, a reminder that in the world of organized crime, yesterday's executioner can quickly become today's victim. Al Capone. Alphonse Gabriel. Al Capone, born January 17, 1899 in Brooklyn, New York, became the most infamous gangster of America's Prohibition era. The son of Italian immigrants, Capone grew up in a rough neighborhood, leaving school at age 14 after hitting a teacher. He drifted into street gangs, eventually falling under the mentorship of Johnny Torrio, who would later shape him into the mastermind behind Chicago's most powerful criminal empire. Capone moved to Chicago in 1919 to help Torrio manage brothels, gambling dens, and most importantly, illegal alcohol distribution during Prohibition. When Torrio retired after an assassination attempt in 1925, Capone took full control of the Chicago outfit. His organization thrived on bootlegging, racketeering, and bribery, reportedly earning over $100 million annually at its peak. Capone's charisma and generosity made him popular in Chicago. He donated to charities, opened soup kitchens, and styled himself as a modern Robin Hood. But behind this image was a ruthless enforcer who silenced rivals with bullets and bombings. His most notorious crime was the St. Valentine's Day Massacre of 1929. 7 members of Bugs Moran's North Side Gang were lined up and executed by Capone's men dressed as policemen using Thompson submachine guns. The massacre shocked the nation and cemented Capone's reputation as the embodiment of gangland violence. Capone lived lavishly, buying custom suits, diamond jewelry, and even a bulletproof Cadillac. He cultivated the press, earning the nickname Public Enemy Number 1. Yet his flamboyance drew relentless attention from law enforcement. Federal agents, unable to pin violent crimes on him, pursued another angle: taxes. In 1931, Capone was convicted of tax evasion and sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. He began his sentence at Atlanta Penitentiary, but was soon transferred to the newly built Alcatraz in 1934. There, the once powerful mob boss found himself reduced to an ordinary inmate stripped of influence. Years of untreated syphilis began to ravage his mind, leaving him mentally impaired. In 1939, after serving 7 years, Capone was released for health reasons. He spent his final years in seclusion at his Florida estate, barely coherent, cared for by his wife and family. Al Capone died on January 25, 1947, at the age of 48, from cardiac arrest following complications of syphilis. Despite his crimes, he remains a cultural icon depicted in films, books, and television as both a ruthless killer and a larger-than-life outlaw. Capone's legacy is a paradox, a man who rose to power through bloodshed, but also became a symbol of charisma and excess. He proved that organized crime could operate like big business, but his story also shows how hubris and visibility can bring even the mightiest gangster crashing down. The stories of these hitmen and mafia bosses reveal how power built on fear always comes with a deadly cost. Some were betrayed by their closest allies, others crushed by the very system they once terrorized. Yet even now their legacies stir fascination and outrage. Were they cunning strategists who outsmarted the law, or reckless monsters who sealed their own fate? That's for you to decide. Share your thoughts below and let's see where you stand. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Legends of Black Excellence for more untold stories that challenge history itself.